welcome everyone to In Search of a Crystal Skull, an epic, exciting adventure into the realms of mediocrity. My name is Aaron.
My name is Patricia.
And we are going to review the second of what's supposed to be the two best Disney sequels, direct-to-DVD sequels. So,
Well, at least according to what Rotten Tomatoes had said. I mean, I know that there are some, but for the most part, these are some of the more higher rated ones.
okay, so, well, you know, people say that you get things right on the second bounce. When it comes to the Cinderella series, I think that goes the rule. So, shall we tell everybody what we think of the third film of the Cinderella franchise?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, here we go. So, Cinderella III is the third movie and the second sequel to the original 1955 classic. So, in this movie, obviously, here's the thing about this, and we're going to say this right off the bat. I have never seen Cinderella 2. So, I have no idea.
I have.
You have. Okay, then. So, tell you what, maybe give me an idea of what we got in Cinderella 2 before we obviously go into Cinderella 3.
Okay, so apparently, with Cinderella 2, I have no idea if they were planning on doing like a Cinderella animated series because it works somewhat similar to like Belle's Magical World and the Atlantis Milo's Return, in which they have like three separate stories telling three separate stories. But in Cinderella 2, there's three different stories. One story it involves with it's about like it's about like a few months after Cinderella and Prince Charming got married, and there are living in the palace, and Cinderella's trying to find out, okay, this is what the palace life is, and she doesn't really care for it too much. She basically is like seeing that the traditions are just so old fashioned, and she wants to change things up a bit. And this has gotten like a lot of the people saying, oh, Cinderella, she's really unorthodox, why is she doing this? We stuck to the traditions. And this is what it's basically like, Cinderella, there's this party coming along, and Cinderella wants to like change, like, oh, getting rid of the curtains and getting rid of the colors of the palace, and wants to be able to revitalize it. And so that's one. The second one is about Jacques, which is the little mouse, the one with the red hat and the red shirt. And he feels unappreciated. He doesn't feel that he can help Cinderella anymore because, she hasn't really been around for very long. And so, he also feels like he can't really do much to help because he's really small. So the fairy godmother turns him into a human by the name of Sir Hugh. And basically, he meets up with someone, and then there's like this cat who keeps like sort of like thinking that maybe he might be the mouse, but it's not 100% sure. But then eventually he learns to be himself, and so he turns back into a mouse again. The third one, it focuses on one of the ugly stepsisters, Anastasia, and she falls in love with a baker. And the Lady Tremaine, the mother, does not want her to be with a baker. She wants her to be of more royal and rich lineage. And so there's kind of like this on and off kind of thing about like her and the baker falling in love with each other. And that's basically Cinderella tells Anastasia, you just have to follow your heart and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so that is pretty much all three stories of Cinderella 2, and they are not very good.
It's just, to me, it doesn't even sound like much of a sequel. It just sounds like more like a series of chronicles.
I mean, that's how a lot of these direct-to-video Disney movies were. It's like you have like Tarzan and Jane felt somewhat similar, in which you had three separate stories, and it all ties up into Tarzan and Jane celebrating their first wedding anniversary. Then you have Belle's Magical World, which also had like 4 or 5 separate stories, but we already know that was supposed to be like the episodes of a TV series that never happened. Atlantis Milo's Return was the same thing, in which they had 3 separate stories, and that was supposed to be the failed pitch of a TV series. So were they trying to do a Cinderella TV series? I'm not sure.
When you really think about it, they really should have done like you remember when Cartoon Network did with the What a Cartoon Show, and like they basically let animators run wild and come up with all these ideas, and then they turned like into a TV show. Maybe they should have just done the same thing. In like, he just said, oh, hey, here's our kind of like, here's some skits from like, what different, Disney characters are getting up to in their worlds.
Well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
Disney did have an equivalent of what a cartoon and oh yeah cartoons called Shorty McShort Shorts, except that pretty much none of the shows that were pitched ever got picked up for a series, so it was deemed pretty much worthless. And
Wow,
nowadays,
fail.
and yeah, I know. It's unlike, with What a Cartoon, we gotten like, Dexter's Laboratory, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Cow and Chicken, Johnny Bravo, the Powerpuff Girls, we gotten those shows. Oh yeah cartoons, we gotten the Fairly Odd Parents, Chalk Zone, and My Life as a Teenage Robot. Random cartoons, we got in Fanboy and Chum Chum and Adventure Time. Well, when it went to the Cartoon Network. But Shorty McShort Shorts got nothing. Like, no show came from that. And I guess maybe that's the reason why we never got that. Nowadays, that format is kind of dated. Nowadays, you kind of see that kind of stuff online as opposed to like in a television show. So, yeah, I don't think Disney is going to be doing that anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, that was basically the preceding events before, obviously, Cinderella 3, and so you probably imagine after hearing out all of that, you think that we'd be filled full of dread to watch this sequel. But surprisingly, I've watched through all of this, and surprisingly, I find it rather tame. I don't think it's really harmful in any particular way. I think there's nothing really we can say that's overly bad about it, can we?
Well, I mean, it's actually a miracle that this was able to become one of the better Disney sequels because as I mentioned before, I remember when I saw Cinderella 2 many years ago and I was like, I'm never going to watch the third one. So I pretty much skipped out on that until just today when we were talking about it for this podcast. And wow, I mean, like I know that the Lindsay Ellis, aka the Nostalgia Chick, talked about like her top 5 best animated Disney sequels, and this was number 1. I'm like, really? Out of like Lion King 2 and Aladdin 3, this was the best one? That made me skeptical. So then when I watched it, I was like, this is absolutely insane.
So we'll give everybody the story of what Cinderella 3 is. So basically, it's kind of like it's like one of those stories of like, oh, what would happen if the slipper didn't fit, or like what would have happened if the preceding events of the first Cinderella movie never happened. And so it was basically so how it all plays out is that Lady Tremaine gets hold of the wand, the Fairy Godmother's wand, and then decides to change all the events from what happened at the end of Cinderella and basically round it back to the final third of the movie, where she uses a magic wand to make Anastasia's foot fit the slipper. And so she was able to do that, and then she basically gets rid of all the evidence to say that Cinderella was ever at the ball. Except for the one thing is that somewhere deep in the prince's mind is that he still has feelings for Cinderella still in that. So it ends up being a situation where Cinderella has to sneak into the palace, has to somehow remind Prince Charming that she is the one that she's supposed to be with, and so she covertly ends up being the official mouse catcher, if you will, and so uses Jock and the other mice to as cover for her to basically be in the palace and work this job, and within that she basically tries to figure out basically what's going on, and so that's basically the premise of this. So. I mean, I guess should we go into spoiler territory for this? I think
Yeah,
we might as well do that. So, I guess in the first act, I guess it's a good setup, I guess you could say. So, I mean, they obviously encase the Fairy Godmother in stone, and then they just wind back the clock, and so then it's in the situation where Cinderella doesn't realize what's happened, what's going on, and you think. But mind you, the one thing I'll say is that you think at the very beginning she'd be like absolutely distraught over what happened and trying to like right off the bat figure out what's going on, but then she kind of like goes into a musical number.
Yeah, like here's the thing. Like a lot of people tend to criticize Cinderella for being just a classic princess damsel in distress. Like, I mean, that's how a lot of these princesses were around the the 30s and 40s, all the way up until like around when the Disney Renaissance era happened, in which we gotten a lot more headstrong, basically independent princesses. So I guess because we've already gotten to the point in which, hey, it's 2007. We've already gotten characters like Ariel and Belle and Mulan. So let's see if we can be able to, tweak Cinderella a little bit and make her into a stronger character, while at the same time keep the integrity of the character.
And it just, I guess they definitely do that with Cinderella. Like, she's not just kind of like, threatening over like every single threat and things like that. She's trying to fight her way through it. So in a way, she becomes quite actiony, which is kind of cool. And but at the same time, like some bits and pieces do come out of nowhere, and that song number definitely was one of them. A little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they were still trying to keep the integrity of, this was around the time 2007 when, Disney was still in their second dark age, or basically the post-Renaissance era, as a lot of people call it, in which Pixar and DreamWorks were basically like taking it over. Disney was in third place, and they were still trying to figure themselves out. I mean, I think that 2007 was it which movie came out around that? Meet the Robinsons or something?
Yeah,
and then
a year later
would be Bolt, and then finally another year later would be Princess and the Frog, which was the movie that pretty much like brought them back. Even though a lot of people say it was Tangled, but I still think that Princess and the Frog at least helped it a little bit.
Yeah, I think Princess and the Frog kind of like was a whistle to say, oh hey, Disney's back doing their normal thing again, and then Tangled and Frozen and everything like that kind of helped it along. So obviously you made it into a bigger thing. So at least that's the way I would probably tell it.
Yeah.
It.
So basically, the reason why those song numbers are there was because our song numbers was able to, be the spirit of what Disney was. We're gonna still keep in the songs, and we're still gonna make it into a musical because that's what people associated with Disney, and they weren't really doing that in the 2000s. Like, sure, maybe Lilo and Stitch, but like nobody was singing that song. I mean, it was like a lot of the soundtrack. You have to understand like the animated movies of the 2000s, about like all the directions that they were doing. Like Shrek was probably one of their most influential movies that ever came out. So everybody was trying to copy off of that. And then when it came to like Pixar didn't use a lot of their musicals unless it was like for a sad moment or for a happy moment. So Disney was still trying to keep into like, okay, we're not going to do the musicals for our main movies, but for our direct-to-video movies where it's based off of an old property, we still have to keep the musical numbers.
So one thing also I think with this movie, which is very surprising, at least for me, was we still got some character evolution out of Anastasia. I don't want the Tremaine.
And they did that in the second movie, in which she fell in love with the baker. And in the post credits from the third movie, you saw that she and the baker actually did get back together again. So yeah, I mean, out of all the characters that you would never expect to have like development, Anastasia, I never expected that either. Like
because at the beginning, the reason I say that is because at the beginning, Anastasia, is at the point where she just wants to be part of royalty and wants to get married and wants to basically heighten her social status. And so she's willing to do it by any means necessary, and that means going along with the Mother Tremaine's plan. But then she realizes at the very beginning, is that what's going to make her happy? And is that is she basically turning into someone she doesn't want to be? And then eventually you get to the final third where she ends up being a literal carbon copy of Cinderella. So she has some evolution in that as well. Like she wants to be herself. She doesn't want to be somebody else. If you know what I mean. So in a way, she has a great story arc in this, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think she does. And Lady Tremaine is just as menacing as ever. She's always one step ahead of Cinderella, and thinking that okay, Cinderella is now no longer going to be marrying the prince because hey, I was able to make it that so the shoe doesn't fit. So it's like, stay away from the prince. And so when she tries to go to the prince, by pretending to be a servant, and then she's like, oh, this woman is dangerous. She's trying to, capture the prince, or, get the princess. And she's, she is actually, a liar and a thief. And so basically every time that Cinderella tries to do something, Lady Tremaine is always one step ahead.
One thing I should have noticed, I think we might have overbrushed, did they kill off Lucifer in this movie?
I mean, Lucifer has gone through a lot in like the previous movies. I mean, we thought in the first movie, Lucifer was dead when, he fell off into Cinderella's tower after Bruno was about to, chomp him away. So I don't know. I mean, is Lucifer dead? Maybe. I mean, it hasn't. I don't think that they would do that. But maybe.
Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, this is Disney we're talking about. There's been some pretty horrendous, villain deaths in movies. Like, I think we've seen someone get hanged. Well, not actually see someone get hanged. Gaston drove thousands of feet to his death. I mean, like, we've seen some pretty horrendous stuff from Disney in regards
Okay,
to like how
fair
villains have
enough.
died. So it wouldn't surprise me if they would put another one up in this. But I mean, who knows at this point? It was too
Mm.
much to notice. But yeah, I mean, in regards to that, I mean, Prince Charming in this, I mean, he has far more character than he did in the first movie. I think we
I
can.
mean, like, there's no doubt. Of course, he does. I mean, all Prince Charming did in the first movie was just like he didn't want to be involved with his father getting a bride for him, and he was just like meeting up with all the girls, and he was completely bored until he met Cinderella. And we don't even see him like going around and where with every single house and like having them put on the slipper. It was the Grand Duke who did it. So, the prince, all we saw from him was like during the ball and then the wedding, and that was it.
Hmm. So, I mean, obviously, a huge, step forward from the first movie, and so, and I mean, dare I say, I mean, I did actually somewhat get to like him, in
Yeah,
this as well. So, because you could tell that, even though he had like this awful spell cast on him, like he still somewhat harbored feelings somewhere deep in for this woman that he met on that night on there, and he just couldn't believe that it was Anastasia at one point, and he actually was suspecting that it was somebody else, and so yeah, and that's a great story driver in all of this, because it makes you wonder, like, at some point, when's he going to remember everything that's going to happen, and then it all kind of like comes together when the mice tell him what's happened. And
yeah,
so,
exactly.
yeah.
And the only way he was able to feel Cinderella's presence was when he held her hand, because he remember holding her hand during the ball, and that was the one thing that made him fall in love with Cinderella as opposed to in Anastasia, when he clearly was trying to remember that, oh, is it this woman that I love that I danced with on the ball? And then when Lady Tremaine was messing with his memory, saying, okay, no, it was Anastasia that you danced with. But then the one thing that it was still carrying throughout the movie was that when he held Cinderella's hand, that was who was the one who he danced with and who he fell in love with.
Hmm. And so, I mean, in regards to Prince Charming, though, I think one thing they tried to do with him, which I felt kind of fell flat a little bit, is that they tried to make him a bit into an action hero in this. But when the initiative for him to go out and try and seek out Cinderella before obviously she gets deported. I mean, obviously that's something that nearly happens in this movie. Yeah, I mean, like they go with like all these action scenes, but when it comes to actually doing the animation for it, they look really goofy. I mean, at one point, like, you remember his father tries to stop him from going down the stairs. So he dives headfirst out the window and pretty much looks like he's falling to his death.
I was expecting like the Goofy scream to happen when he was falling.
Yeah, and like, like the Looney Tunes crash when, like,
Yeah.
like that one. And so, I mean, it was just, yeah, that came out so quick. Well, it actually came out so quick, I actually couldn't believe it. And so I actually asked you if I could rewind the footage to actually say, can we just watch that again just to make sure I saw what I saw?
Yeah, and that never happens, by the way.
Yeah, it's just that it just came. It's only like a couple of seconds as well of animation. So, and there's actually a GIF of it as well on Twitter somewhere where I think I actually posted it up somewhere. I think
You
of, like,
did.
yeah, I did, and just like it's you just have to watch it again and again to see it, and it just gets funnier as far as more you watch it. So, but then that's nothing. Like there's the bit where he goes on. I think it's like in the windmill. I think he like rides a horse up into the windmill, goes all the way up with the horse, and then somehow ends up crashing through the window and like going flying over to the ship and then landing like on the sails like Peter Pan style and then coming down. And
Yeah,
like, yeah, it just, I mean, it looks goofy. I mean,
it
like,
does.
it just doesn't play to like, if they were going for some kind of like heroic thing about the, but what annoying me about that is, and I guess you could say this is something I don't particularly like about it, is that they did like all this pretexting as well, of like him being like in a sword fight. When he's doing like all the fencing with his father and in the gymnasium, and I'm just sitting there like, oh wow, they're like pretexting like there's going to be this epic sword fight. That's going to happen like at the in the final third, and he's going to have to save Cinderella in that. Okay, but they didn't really go anywhere with that. It was just a scene
Mm,
that was just there
Yeah,
for
I was
dialogue.
expecting like Prince Charming fighting against like maybe the men who were trying to take Cinderella away, and maybe it's like, I'm gonna have to fight you to it, even though I don't think that would have happened because obviously, those were his men to begin with. So, I mean, yeah, or maybe Lady Tremaine would have summoned like a monster, and Prince Charming had to fight for Cinderella's safety, kind of like Sleeping Beauty. But yeah, again, that never really happened. I mean, I
Yeah,
guess
like it's just
they were trying to make Prince Charming like Prince Philip, and that didn't really work.
no, like I think yeah, you can have, now that I think about it, I think he is quite Prince Philippi in this movie, isn't he?
Yeah, he
Like
is, and I guess that makes a lot of sense because Prince Charming didn't have any personality to begin with.
yeah. So also the king's in this movie, and he's quite pretty much the comedy relief in this, and
Yeah,
like
he was the comedy relief in the second movie as well. It's kind of like being a little bit daffy and kind of like sort of accepting Cinderella stuff at first, and then he was like seeing, oh, this actually is a good idea, Cinderella. Maybe we should implement this into our palace.
yeah, but then at the same time, he's also serious as well because he's like, look, I've wasted so much time, looking for this princess. Now we finally got her, and now all of a sudden you want to go searching out again. Like, it's
Yeah.
just it's so in a way his motivations are understandable because he's none the wiser of what's going on in the entire movie. He just thinks that everything's just kind of like, keep in mind this is like a Back to the Future scenario. Like, it's he's just basically playing out what he thinks is his reality. He doesn't know that Lady Tremaine is basically working magic behind the scenes.
Yeah, and not only that, but we already know that pretty much everything throughout the movie of the reason why the ball is happening, the reason why Cinderella is with the prince is because of the king, because the reason why he did it was because he wanted grandchildren and he fears that he has not a lot of time left to live. So he wants to find, a woman for the prince to marry, and that way he can be able to see his grandchildren before he dies.
Yeah, and also there's the bit as well where he brings up his wife, who's obviously dead in this movie, because
Of course, of course.
why would you have living mothers in Disney World? Like it's amazing that people procreate in this universe. From the earlier generations of dead moms. But in regards to that, I mean, he does have a pretty touching moment with Anastasia where he hands over the most what he thinks is the most precious object that he owns, which is a seashell, and hands it over to Anastasia, and that also inspires Anastasia to say, "Oh, hey, this really what I want, and is this really am I just taking the place of somebody who I shouldn't be?" So I mean, so there's funnily enough, the king and Anastasia, who are not the title characters and not I wouldn't say the main characters of this movie, are getting some interesting dialogue amongst themselves.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, this Cinderella 3 has a lot to offer, I think, for a lot of people, and so I'm not too surprised that it's actually we are kind of shocked really about how this all came about. Like, it came out of a very awful pretext, and then all of a sudden, they've just seemed to. This should have probably been the second movie.
Yeah, that would have been great. That would have been amazing if this would have been the second movie, but nope, well, of course not. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
And the fact that this was actually one of the last of the direct-to-video Disney sequels, right before John Lasseter shut the whole thing down, and then DisneyToon Studios were working on Tinkerbell movies and the Planes series, and then DisneyToon Studios is no longer with us, so.
Well, he discontinued it, but he didn't kill it off entirely. I mean, obviously we got two Frozen sequels after Frozen, so I mean,
Yeah, but those were like official. To be fair, it's kind of a debate. I mean, are any of these sequels like official?
Well,
It's hard to
okay, I'm being
say.
unfair. I mean, I was talking about the shorts more than the sequels. I mean,
Yeah, the shorts and sequels are two completely different things.
yeah, but I mean, in regards to continuations of the story, I mean, I think we're still going to get that from Disney as long as they see them as profitable. So
Yeah, I mean, I mean, like in recent years, they started actually doing sequels to their movies, like Ralph Breaks the Internet and Frozen 2. But for the most part, when it comes to like official Disney sequels, Disney doesn't do it very often. I mean, there's like The Rescuers Down Under and and the other ones that I just mentioned. So yeah, for the most part, they don't do sequels.
yeah,
I
but
mean,
and the reluctance to the point where if ideas do get drawn up, and even if they do somewhat go somewhere down the line, a director stops it dead in its tracks. Apparently there was supposed to be a Cinderella 4 after Cinderella 3. And
yep.
that has not, that has basically been talked about for 4 years, and nothing's ever happened to it.
Yeah,
So
there were supposed to be a lot more direct-to-video Disney sequels that never happened. There was supposed to be an Aristocat sequel that would focus on Marie. There would have been a Dumbo sequel where they focus on other animals. There was supposed to be a lot more, but then John Lasseter just shut the project down. And Little Mermaid: Ariel's Beginnings was the last Disney sequel right before they focused on the first Tinkerbell movie.
yeah, but mind you, then we got the live action movies, and it kind of makes me wonder, like, did Disney really change for the better at that point? When you
Oh,
think about it, yeah.
I'm actually curious for all of you guys listening in. Post in the comments below. Which do you think are worse? Do you think that the direct-to-video Disney movies are worse, or the live-action Disney remakes are worse?
Well, financially speaking, I mean, these live action movies have made millions of dollars, and also The Lion King also broke $1 billion as well. So, like, I guess you could say in that aspect, I guess you could say they're
Sure,
more successful than.
yes, financially, yes, the live action movies are better, but when it comes to the quality, I mean, like, there hasn't been a lot that really justified its existence. Like, a lot of people didn't really care for the Beauty and the Beast remake, or the Maleficent movies haven't really exactly like turned heads. Then there's the Lion King movie, and then there's like um let's see what else. I mean, I guess Pete's Dragon and the Lion and the Jungle Book and obviously the 2015 version of Cinderella are the only ones that I see people really like praising, and not counting the 101 Dalmatians movie, but that came out in the 90s. I'm talking about the more recent ones.
Hmm.
Oh,
Anyway,
and
sorry, go on.
I guess I have to mention one more thing. So, the one thing that I did like about that was featured in this movie was that a lot of the characters do seem to get some attention. It's not like just focusing on one. And I know they try to do that with Cinderella too, but the stories felt kind of separate. But in here, they felt like they were put together.
Well,
You got to see
well,
the struggles of
it was a complete movie. I mean, like, it wasn't just like different segments all like kind of glued together, kind of like Belle's Magical World.
Well, I
So.
mean, I was mentioning that for Cinderella too because they
Oh.
were like separate stories that were pretty much glued together. But here, it actually does fit together. We get to see Anastasia struggling to accept that maybe she doesn't want the prince. Maybe she wants to be loved by actual love as opposed to being forcefully loved. And so Lady Tremaine was like, "No, I'm not going to have this, Anastasia. You are going to marry the prince, and you're going to do it no matter what I say." And she does everything from like continually brainwashing the prince, and even when Cinderella was able to convince the prince that she was the one who was dancing with the prince. Lady Tremaine once again took another step direction by having her trying to deport her, and then transforming Anastasia into Cinderella, and they were really close to having the marriage. It almost kind of reminds me a little bit of Little Mermaid, in which like in Little Mermaid, Ursula disguised herself as a girl named Vanessa, and she was able to sing the same way as Ariel because she actually had Ariel's voice. And then she brainwashed Prince Eric, and they were able to have the wedding right away. And it just took Cinderella to come in and disrupt it alongside with her animal friends. It kind of somewhat similar, in which like Cinderella's trying to rush over to the wedding right before Anastasia and the prince get married, and it's like this huge lie, except that the difference is that Cinderella rushes in on time and sees shockingly that Anastasia says, "I don't want to marry you." And then she's like shocked and is like wondering why. And it's like, because, well, I'm not who you think I am. And so then finally, Cinderella was able to come in, and then Anastasia turned back to normal, and Lady Tremaine is so angry. And then there's like this big, wand fight. And then finally, the fairy godmother gets freed. And then we have the ending where Lady Tremaine and Driscilla are working in the dungeons as servants, which is kind of like a nice little reversal that, with Cinderella being the servant to the house all her years, now that's going to happen to them. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think that they were able to tie in the story pretty nicely.
Yeah. So, one thing I wanted to probably end on was the fact that the end of Cinderella 3. I mean, they pretty much left it at the point where they were happy that it was overwritten, and that so they didn't like decide to like go back on to like revert everything back to the original story, because you think that was going to be the way that they did it. So it kind of leaves a bit of a confusion for me. So it's like, is Cinderella 3 basically saying in the Cinderella lore, forget the first movie, the third movie is basically what happened? Like, or
Yeah, like you remember that was what the case was, in which like the fairy godmother's like, "Would you like me to turn you back in time and like forget that everything that happened already never happened. And she was like, nah. So maybe, I mean, I was thinking that, oh, maybe I want to fall in love with the prince all over again, and we get to spend our first year together, and now we have a stronger appreciation for each other. But maybe you're right, Aaron. Maybe it's like they're trying to remove the first movie out of the agenda. But that's kind of distasteful, if you ask me.
Well, I mean, like the first instance did happen, and then all of a sudden they twisted time and then rewrote back over it again. It's just, it's
It's
weird.
confusing. Yeah, it's confusing. So you're trying to tell me that it takes place after the ball, but maybe they're trying to remove Cinderella 2 from the agenda? It's
I
like,
don't know.
all the events from Cinderella 2 didn't happen, in which, like, Anastasia and the baker never met, and Jacques didn't feel unappreciated, so he never turned into human. I don't know. That's kind of hard to say.
Oh, maybe they erased the second movie, so yeah, I think maybe they did us a favor.
Okay, if that's the case, then yeah, then thank you, Cinderella 3. Maybe Disney knew that Cinderella 2 sucks, which is why they did Cinderella 3's ending the way it was. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
maybe.
mean, I don't know.
So, anyway, we're going to cover some scores. So, I mean, I would say it's very surprising. I mean, like, I wouldn't say it's like my favorite Disney movie or by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, I'd say I'd give it about 7.5.
Yeah,
At the
I would
moment.
say 7.5 as well because what rank did we give Lion King 1.5? 7.5 as well?
I think we gave it around about that time, yeah. So,
Yeah, so both of these movies, I don't think that they'll be as like praised as their original movies, but at least they're not, hot steaming piles of garbage. So it's nowhere near as bad as like Belle's Magical World or Hunchback of Notre Dame 2, in which like these movies just didn't need to exist. Like I can understand the justification of these movies' existences. Like what would have been like if we saw Timon and Pumbaa's perspective of what happened during the events of The Lion King? And with Cinderella, it's like, what would have happened if the fairy godmother's wand was taken away by Lady Tremaine, and she was able to revert everything back from the beginning, and then have Anastasia do the dancing with the prince as opposed to Cinderella. So yeah, they were able to actually tell some really interesting stories. The characters are just as engaging, and also the voice acting is actually pretty good, and the animation looks pretty decent too.
actually, that's one thing actually we forgot we actually brushed over a little bit, actually. Like the music and the animation and the presentation. I mean, dare I say, maybe they might have, because Return to Neverland obviously came out in theaters, didn't it?
Yes, it
And
did.
yeah,
Return to Neverland, and Jungle Book 2 came out in theaters.
yeah, like it makes you wonder: was Cinderella 3 kind of destined to also come out in theaters as well? Looking how well,
I don't think so because 2007 was the year that Cinderella 3 came out, and 2002 and 2003 I think was when the Jungle Book came out, and because both of those movies didn't do well in the theaters, that they decided, okay, no more theatrical direct-to-video movies, and we even said that for Lion King 1.5. That came out in 2004. So maybe they wanted to do the same thing for Lion King 1.5, but that didn't happen. So I guess they were like sorted out to, okay, we're just going to release these on direct to video, just like we've been doing in the previous movies. Our theatrical movies didn't really make a dent in the box office because, as we mentioned before, DreamWorks and Pixar were at main competition, and anything produced by Disney was looked upon very palely compared to the other stuff.
uh huh. So anyway, that is the end of our Cinderella 3 review, and because we've been doing this now for a good couple of episodes, and because most of you have been enjoying this, we're actually going to have a special episode in this one. So everybody tune in next week when we do a special review of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World from 1963, and we will be putting it up against Rat Race, the John Cleese film of 2001. So
Yeah, that should be really interesting.
cool. So until that special episode, take care, everybody, and we will see you next time on In Search of the Crystal Skull. Take care, and bye-bye for now.
See you later.